Hola, buenas noches, buenas tardes. How is everybody doing? Thank you to everybody who has joined me live. I see y'all are already in the chat, ready to go. Feel free to drop your questions in the chat and I'll star them and we'll get to them. If you're watching this video on my channel, it's probably because you are looking to move abroad. And often we hear a lot about like the usual suspects, Mexico, Panama, Colombia. But it's not often we hear from folks who have moved to Peru. And that's why I'm excited about my guest tonight. But before I bring her on, in case you are new or you're watching this replay and you're not sure who I am or why YouTube has served you this video, let me introduce myself. My name is Adelia Aborashade, aka Picky Girl Travels the World. This is my channel where we talk all things travel, life abroad, and money, and how those things intersect. So, if those are topics that you're into, definitely stick around, subscribe, turn on notifications, and let YouTube know you want more content like this coming to your feed. Hello to everybody in the comments again, y'all. If you've got questions, drop them in the chat and we will do our best to get them answered. Hello.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good. I'm good. Um, I would love if you could introduce yourself to the people.
Sure. My name is Claire. About 3 months ago, I started a YouTube channel called Travel Spanish with Claire, and where I talk about my time in Peru, from residency to culture shocks to learning the language, everything, all of the above. In my previous life, I was a college professor for many, many years. But I got burnt out, I got tired, and that is also something that I talk about on my channel. And now I'm a full-time traveler. I haven't worked for 5 years.
Oh, wow. Now, have you been traveling that whole time?
I have, yes.
Okay. All right. Well, um, we're going to just jump in and I'm curious, why did you leave the US? Because there are lots of folks. The United States is a large place. You can travel there. You can not work a 9 to 5 and never leave the US. So I am curious, why did you decide to leave?
Great question. So I was actually inspired by a movie I'm sure we have all seen. It's called Shawshank Redemption. Have you seen it? So in the
Yeah.
movie, the main character, Andy Dufresne, is in there for killing his wife, but he's actually innocent. And is this to make a long story short, he eventually escapes, and the place that he go is Mexico. So when I watched that movie, I was inspired. I was coming off of leaving my job, and I thought the first place that I'm going to go is Mexico. And so that's where I
Now,
started.
did you go to Zihuatanejo?
No, I didn't actually go there. I was in Mexico City and Cancun, but I did go to Mexico. I made it to Mexico, and I was very excited about that. I felt like I was a main character in that movie when I finally made it to Mexico.
Okay, so seeing that inspired you to look outside the US. And this was about 5 years ago?
Yes. I started, the first place I actually went was Jamaica, but I only stayed for like a week or two. But when I got to Mexico, I stayed for months and months and months. And that's when I first started learning Spanish.
Okay. And so when you ventured to Jamaica first and then to Mexico, what was your game plan? Was it just to bop around? Was there no plan?
I would say I had absolutely no plan. So I showed up in Mexico and I didn't know any Spanish. So that shows you I didn't have a plan at all. So I could only say a few words. And I was hoping to be able to find people who spoke English, but I wasn't that lucky, especially in Mexico City. So imagine how frustrated I was, thinking it's going to be like in the movie. People speak English here, no problem. But I was shocked.
I feel bad for the discomfort you experienced, but I am glad that you mentioned that because I think, in particular, US Americans have this sense that, well, English is spoken a lot of places. No matter where I go, there will be someone who speaks English. And while there is a certain amount of truth to that, in a place like Mexico City, yes, this is actually where there are the most English speakers in the whole country.
Mhm.
However, it's a city of 22 million people. So even though there are the most English speakers here, that doesn't necessarily mean you are going to cross paths with those people.
Exactly. And that's what happened to me. I was trying to use my English in restaurants and stores, walking the street, asking for directions. I got lost. I only knew English, but I was determined to only speak English. I don't know why. I obviously knew it was Mexico, but I thought that I could survive. It wasn't until I went to my next country, or maybe two countries later, that I decided to learn Spanish.
Okay. And so you had no plan at all. So was there even a vague notion of the places that you would visit? Or was it just kind of like, we will see when I'm ready to go, what feels good?
I did not have a plan. I did not have a list of countries. In my final job where I worked, I was in Los Angeles at UCLA, and I remember like my last day talking to like the head of the department and telling him that I was going to leave, and he really didn't believe me. So can you imagine? And it was, I probably gave like a month's notice, and I wrote the letter, I typed the letter, but it was just something on the inside where I knew I could make it. It was just like that still small voice. And of course, it was a leap of faith. It was crazy to a lot of my friends, my family, but I knew that I could make it. I knew that I could make it not working there, because as a psychologist, I wasn't able to help anybody. I was making all of this money. I was working on a multi-million dollar project that had been funded by the federal government. Yet and still, my job was just to make a lot of money and talk about people who have problems rather than helping people who have problems. So imagine my dream was to become a psychologist to help so many people, especially the most vulnerable. But my job cut me off from being able to do that. And it was constant in every job I had. So I got tired of that and I thought, I have this call on my life to help people. It's never going to go away. So what can I do? What leap of faith can I take to make sure that eventually, it may not be today, it may not be this year, it may not be this month, eventually I connect with people who I'm called to serve. And so I felt like I'm going to take a leap of faith. I was raised in the South, in the Bible Belt, where my parents taught me about God and how He will always complete His plan in your life. And that was something that I wanted to see Him do. So I took that leap of faith, I stepped out on faith, and I haven't looked back since, 5 years later.
So you were like, I'm quitting and I'm going to leave. But there was no plan about where you were going to go or how long you were going to be gone for.
No, I thought that I was going to stay in Mexico forever. I thought that once I got there, people would be speaking English. Even if you're not at a resort, I could communicate, but that wasn't the case. So once I discovered that, I decided to go to Puerto Rico because I heard that there's a little bit of a mix. English and Spanish is spoken. However, what did
It
I find?
is officially bilingual. That is what it says on paper.
That's what it says, but when I got there, there was a little bit English. a little bit more than Mexico, but no, you really need to know Spanish, in my opinion, to really immerse yourself in the community in Puerto Rico. So to me, no. So the next place I went was Dominican Republic. And imagine the shock. Have you heard that accent?
Yes, and I cannot understand anything they say.
Exactly. So that's when I said, you know what? I know I want to live in a Spanish speaking country. So I need to get serious about this Spanish. I need to learn Spanish and not just a little bit of Spanish, but learn it fluently. So that's when I got serious when I heard the Dominican accent.
And so, what did you do to start learning Spanish?
The first thing I did was downloaded that famous app Duolingo, and it really gave me, in my personal opinion, a strong foundation for learning the language. I didn't know any words, so it was very important for me to have a little bit of vocabulary. So I started learning a little bit, and it was so funny because I tried to use it in the Dominican Republic, and they were laughing at me. They were like, "What? What did you say?" Right? So
Yeah.
hard. I was trying so hard to communicate, but when people laugh at you, and I didn't feel offended, I think they were doing it to be funny. And sometimes I would laugh because the pronunciation was so horrid. But I was trying nonetheless. But that's when I said, okay, I have to do more than Duolingo. That's when I got the books. That's when I discovered italki. I started speaking with other native English speakers who had learned Spanish. There is a young man on YouTube. He has a channel called Bilingual Blogs, and he mastered the Dominican accent. So I started watching his videos to learn more and more Dominican Spanish.
Okay. And so, how long did you stay in the Dominican Republic?
I was only there about 4 months, thanks to the accent.
Okay. And so, you knew you wanted to be somewhere in a Spanish speaking country. The Dominican accent wasn't really doing what you needed it to do. So, what was your next move?
I decided that I needed to go somewhere where they spoke English, but still study Spanish. So I took my resources with me. I took the Duolingo, I took the grammar books, I took the fact that I discovered italki, but I went to an English speaking country. I went to South Africa where
Okay.
but I could continue studying Spanish because I was serious about one day eventually returning to a country where I could use the Spanish.
Okay. And so, how long ago was South Africa?
Um, I'm terrible with dates. I've gone twice. The first time, Joburg. The second time,
Mhm.
and so I kept taking the Spanish classes there. First in Joburg, where I could speak, even though they have a heavy accent, where I could speak nothing but English, but learn Spanish online. That's when I started this.
Mhm.
And then I decided I would come back to the US for a while and then try Cape Town because Cape Town and Johannesburg are two different worlds.
Very
Complete.
much so. Okay. And so, because I'm trying to figure out how did you end up in Peru? Because
Right,
you initially thought you'd be in Mexico forever, and then you end up all the way in South Africa.
right. So that's when I decided after South Africa, I want to try Colombia, right? Because I discovered in my studies that they have actually one of the clearest, most easy to understand Spanish accents, supposedly.
I
Not
disagree with that.
course, not everybody agrees, but there's a guy on YouTube. He was learning Colombian Spanish, and he said, "Oh, they have the clearest accent. Come to Colombia." So that's what I did, and that's where I spent the bulk of my time in Colombia. I started in Medellin, And then I went to Cali. And after Cali, I went to Bogota and then Barranquilla. So the bulk of my time has been spent in Colombia learning Colombian Spanish. I had started during my time in Colombia researching a little bit about Peru. There was a guy on YouTube who started posting videos about Peru. And I thought, I'm not going there. I don't like it. That was my initial thought. I'm not going there. I don't like it. I don't like the way it looks. It doesn't seem like a place that's even makes sense for me. So that, and so many times when I had an opportunity to leave Colombia and go to Peru because the flights are so cheap to go from Colombia to Peru, or if you want to go to any neighboring place, I just refused. One time I was going to go to Peru and I canceled the flight last minute and stayed in Colombia. So I lost that money. So it really took years for me to decide that, okay, I'm going to at least try Peru. And I can't really answer the question why it took so long, but it took years.
So, how did you stay in Colombia all that time?
A student visa, if you sign up for any type of Spanish course, school, you can stay for an extended period of time. And a lot of Americans do that there.
Okay.
Mhm.
Okay. And so what was the thing that made you pull the trigger, that made you say, "Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna give Peru a chance?"
Right. Great question. So I was in Medellin, and every day I would wake up and see the news reports of the deaths. Americans started dying in Medellin. And not
Hmm.
only locals, for example, the news report that really helped me pull the trigger, the last straw, was there was a Catholic priest who went to watch a soccer game in a bar. And someone put something in his drink. He slumped over at the bar and he never woke up. And that happened during my time there. And I said, you know what? I have to try another place because this place has become extremely dangerous, not only for Americans, but for local Colombians as well. So that's when I started deciding, okay, I'm going to try Peru because it's very close, the flight is cheap, and I've heard good things about it, and it's worth a try.
Okay. And when did you actually go and move there?
That was only about 5 months ago. 5 months ago,
Okay.
finally escaped
Okay.
and made it to Peru.
Okay. And so, um, what was that like initially? Um, Given that you'd been in the DR, you'd been to Puerto Rico, you'd been to Mexico. Mexico City and Cancun are very different places, but those Latin American countries, and then here is Peru. So, what were your initial feelings when you arrived?
Mm, I would say I mainly felt overwhelmed by the difference. Um, you could just feel when you come. It's really hard to describe. I would say that when I was in Colombia, which is a place where I also thought I would stay forever because it's so easy to get the student visa and study Spanish instead. But when I got there, the tension, the pressure that I felt in Colombia was,
Hmm.
and that was kind of an overwhelming type shock. Like, wow, what's happening? And when you think about the spiritual nature of places, I guess that's what I'm referring to. So to have an apartment there on the water, that was kind of my first impression was, wow, look at the views. I just was impressed from the very beginning, and it exceeded my expectations from the very beginning because, again, my expectations for Peru were low.
Okay, and this was in Lima.
Yes. Hmm.
Now, Had living near the water, had that been something you'd been wanting to do? Had that been, like, on your list?
Yes, it has been. I think two big things were always on my list. I always wanted to live in a big city where things were easily accessible. I didn't want to live in any rural area where I had to travel far and did not have access to basic things. Another thing that I really wanted, especially when I was initially in Cancun, Mexico, was that water view. Because in Cancun, it's very easy to have that. Very easy to have those
Yeah,
view of the water. So I wanted those two things, but I initially only wanted them in Mexico. And so when I got that in Peru, I thought, wow, this is really great.
okay. And had you the time you'd spent learning Colombian Spanish, did that help or hinder things when you landed in Lima?
I would say it helped a lot because, again, to my surprise, and I guess this is part of kind of the American programming that we do have, we do expect to arrive anywhere and people would greet us in English. I don't know why that is, but I think by and large, we're taught that everybody from every country has a little bit of English knowledge. Even if you go to Japan, you're going to be able to find
Mhm.
who speak English because it is a very widely spoken language. However, simple things like check ins at the apartments were all 100% in Spanish. Nobody was there to speak any English. Nobody spoke to me in English. So I had to use that Spanish that I had studied in Colombia.
And how did you feel? Were you comfortable? Were there immediate, like, gaps? Like, for instance, I initially moved to, Tegucigalpa, Honduras, before I moved to Mexico City, and I thought I had learned Spanish when I was in Honduras, and then I got here and was like, "Oh, no, you know grocery store Spanish. That's all you can do." I did not have renting apartment Spanish. I did not have ordering furniture Spanish. I didn't have any of that.
Right. So herein lies the difference. So I would say that after I went through all of that stuff in the DR in Mexico for 3 years, I seriously studied the language, seriously studied the language. And so that means today, at any given time, I can switch from Spanish to English. So that's fluency, fluency. And I can talk about anything because of the amount of time that I put in. So when I got there and my mind was in English, when they began to speak with me in Spanish, just like that, I could speak in Spanish without a problem. So that I think was it's kind of like a check I have to give to Colombia because I got that from Colombia, but I was able to use it in Peru.
Okay. All right. So, um, you have been in Peru ever since. What made you stay?
Wow, I would say the number one thing that has kind of endeared me to the place is how I've been treated. So the people have welcomed me like family. For example, living in New York, living in LA, it's easy to get in the elevator and nobody speaks to each other. They're on their phone, they're doing other things, or they're looking around like you don't exist. When you get in the elevator here, everybody speaks to each other. Buenas, buenos dias. Nobody walks past like you don't exist. And it's easy because they'll start a conversation as well. Just the other day, I got in the elevator and someone says, ¿De dónde eres? Brasil? And I said, well, basically, for those of you who don't speak Spanish, where are you from? Brazil? And I said, no, the United States. And she said, oh, I've been sick for 3 days and I haven't talked to that many people. This is my first day getting out, getting some sunshine. She just started a conversation, of course, 100% in Spanish. And we ended up talking and we exchanged WhatsApps after that. And that's kind of a normal thing here.
That is my worst nightmare. I do
Really?
not want some stranger in an elevator to talk to me.
Happens all the
No, no, thank you.
Really? It happens all the time.
Well, true. It does, and I just try to discourage it. So I tip my hat to you. Um, okay, so you've been treated well. A lot of the folks who watch this channel are Black women. And so that is a question many of them have is how are you received as a Black woman there in Lima?
I would say really good. I would say really good. I haven't had any problems with anyone. And as a person who can speak the language, I think one of the pluses is that you will know if someone's saying something about you. So that's important. And I haven't had those types of issues. So to me, it's been really great. No incidences, no incident to tell you about. Like, it's just really the only thing I could say is when you go from speaking English to Spanish, it's almost like my brain kind of stays in Spanish. And sometimes I kind of catch myself trying to pronounce the words in Spanish. So when you're in a country 100% of the time, it's different from a visit because sometimes I have now problems with my English because I'll try to pronounce the words the way my brain is thinking in Spanish, and the transition sometimes can be difficult.
Okay. Um, so you had low expectations. Um, did you have any surprises once you got there and started living in Peru?
Yes, I think the biggest surprise was around the weather. It's pretty cold when I first arrived. So they only have two seasons here in Lima specifically. All of the other places obviously are different. And it was just extremely cold. I wasn't expecting that. I had things like shorts. I had the stuff from Colombia. So I had
Well,
sleeves, stuff. I was prepared to wear my stuff from Colombia and I couldn't. Had to go out and buy
what
stuff.
is because what time of year did you arrive in Lima?
Gosh, I can't remember the exact month. Maybe 5 months ago. It was whatever month. What month are we in
So
now?
that would have been the height of winter
Right.
because seasons are reversed in South America.
And they did say that this is one of the most intense winters they've had in many years. However, that didn't soothe the blow for me. I was still freezing. So, but next winter, I'm going to live in Cusco for the winter time, for the winter period, because it's warm there. So
Is because what's the elevation in Lima?
I'm not sure off the top of my head, but what I
'Cause
can
I
tell
feel like it's higher than here in Mexico City.
might be, but I didn't experience the elevation sickness here, but I did in Mexico City. I didn't have that here.
Interesting.
Yes, and someone wrote to me on my channel and asked me about that, and I kept telling them, no, no, I never experienced that. And they said, no, that's not true. Yes, you did. And I said, no, I didn't.
Okay. All right. So the weather surprised you. You were not prepared, much colder than you expected. Anything else?
Yes. I know a lot of Black women are watching this, so I want to mention this. A lot of the men will approach you. That was kind of shocking to me coming from Colombia, where there were some men who approached me, but in Lima, many more, many more. And that was a bit shocking. I wasn't prepared. So, in my walks to the store, in my time at the mall shopping, you're going to get approached more. And I don't know why.
Okay. All right. Um, so you've been there 5 months. What are your plans for the future? How long are you thinking about staying?
Um, I'd like to stay long term. I'd like to purchase an apartment on the water. That absolutely is a goal of mine. There's an area here called Miraflores where a lot more American expats decide to live. Today, the apartments are pretty affordable. However, in the future, I think that's going to change because China recently invested about $3.1 billion in a port here in Peru, and that's going to bring a lot more foreign investors in the next 5 years. So I think this is a good time to get in. So that's my goal,
Mm-hmm.
touring those apartments to find out what the prices are and secure something like that for long term. And even if I leave and go to another country, like I want to visit Ecuador eventually, I could rent it out on Airbnb. It could be like an investment property. It's just something that I really want to accomplish here in Lima.
Okay. Now, have you contemplated getting residency there?
So they have a couple of similar options that Colombia had. The biggest thing that they're coming out with in the coming months that they didn't have before is the digital nomad visa. Everybody that I knew was either on the retirement visa or the student visa where you're studying Spanish. But in the coming months, they are coming out with the digital nomad visa, which I hope to be able to apply for and then purchase the property.
Okay. Um, are you working? Are you consider yourself a digital nomad?
Yes, I consider myself a digital nomad. I think in the future, I want to do more work around digitally, work from home jobs. But mostly, I'm investing money. But that would still qualify
Okay.
as digital nomad. As long as you do a certain amount of hours per week, that would still qualify.
Okay. All right. We had a couple of questions about like your daily life there in Lima. Could you speak about getting around the city, like using transit?
Sure, absolutely. Good question. So I have taken the bus here in Lima. In Lima, it has unleashed a plan in the future to also have a train system, but they have not finished that yet. So the cheapest form of transportation that they have is the bus. I have taken the bus, and I will be honest with you, it's not something I would do every day. I took the bus many, many times because all of the local people were telling me that, oh, it's so easy, it's fast. And I also, the times where I took the bus, there was always a local person with me. So they helped me kind of navigate the bus. I would say there's two things that I really didn't like about the bus, and then I'll give two things that I did like. The crowding. The crowding on the bus, especially during peak hours, but even sometimes during off peak hours, I did not like. The second thing is um, the it's not as fast as your Uber or whatever. You're going to have to wait longer if you take the bus. Two things that I did like though about taking the bus is again how accommodating the people are when you get on there. How if it's crowded and you're a woman, some of the men will get up and give up some of the seats in the front. That's great. And the second thing was just having the experience because I don't like going to these places and living kind of like an American, very privileged, and you don't really get to really have the true experience of living in a place.
Okay. What can you tell us about the we had another question. What can you tell us about the food?
Excellent question. So it's considered the culinary capital of the South America. And I would say, compared to all of the other countries that I've been to, it has the best food. And I'll tell you why. Because it's a combination of taste and health. So I've lost a lot of weight here in Lima because a lot of the food comes in small portions, but it's satisfying. So the dish that basically I would love to eat every day, but I don't, is ceviche. No one does ceviche like the Peruvians. And it's a very lightweight, simple, very healthy dish that has helped me drop a lot of those pounds from the Colombian fried food. And it's become kind of the norm to have more fresh food than I did before. So I would say the food here is delicious, is definitely not to be missed, and I've truly enjoyed it. It's probably one of the best parts of living in Peru, the food.
Okay, okay. Diane was wondering, since you spent a significant amount of time in both places, what would you say is the biggest difference between Peru and Mexico?
In Mexico, hmm, I would say there are, similar to what you mentioned before, Mexico to me, especially Cancun, but also Mexico City, they have become very Americanized. And you will get that feeling the longer you stay, meaning you don't have to meet actual Americans to start to hear. For example, I was in a restaurant, and this was a normal thing, and they were playing all American rock and roll music in Mexico City. It's hard to be able to hear Spanish music in Mexico. So the fact that it's so Americanized in a lot of parts of Mexico, I did not like that because it made me feel like I had not left. You don't get as much of that here in Lima. It's more separated from a lot of the American culture, a lot of the American customs. And I'm not saying it's completely separated because America is a very powerful entity and they have touched every corner of the world, including Lima. So you will get some American, well, for example, that you can find every American restaurant known to man in Lima. You can find Pizza Hut, McDonald's, all of those American chains are here, Starbucks. But when you go to things like local restaurants, like I tend to do, you're not going to hear the American music. And that's a relief.
Uh, Chanel wants to know, these men that were approaching you, are they single?
I tried not to engage them that much. You know that of I gave them the avoidance speech, like, oh, I'm in a rush, you gotta go, or stuff like that. Or when as soon as they ask for my phone number. So I try not to gather details about them. I try not to encourage them. There was one guy who waited for me outside the grocery store and asked to take a picture with me once. And I was like, wow, this is getting intense. Um, so I really don't engage them in conversation because there's 0% interest, not because they're not attractive. I'm just not interested, don't have time. And so I try to limit the conversations to just a couple of words, like, oh, you're very beautiful. Thank you. Bye. That kind of thing.
Okay, no, I get you. I get you. Okay, so who would you say, based on your experience there, who would you say that Lima specifically, but Peru generally, would not be a good choice for? Like, who's somebody that this is probably not the right destination for them?
Sure. I would say a couple of things. I'll give you about three things that I think are important. The first thing, if you don't speak any Spanish and you're not willing to learn, Peru overall might not be a good fit for you. That's the number one important thing that I tell people. And many people have asked me, can I come? And if I don't speak any Spanish, I don't think you would have a comfortable time because I just know on a day to day basis how much Spanish I have to use, and I wouldn't recommend it if you don't know any Spanish. Another type of person is if you're a nightlife person, I think there are better options for you in Colombia, specifically Cali. I think Cali is a wonderful place if you're a person of color, if you're a Black woman specifically, you love going out a lot. Try Cali. There's a large Black population. You can blend in more, especially if you know a little bit of Spanish. You can learn salsa, which is something that I did. It's a beautiful, beautiful environment for people who look like us. So I think Cali is better than Lima if you are a nightlife person, if you love dancing and that type of thing. The third thing is if you're looking for dating. So there are some people who are interested in dating. I think Colombia still would be better for somebody a black woman who's interested in dating somebody seriously, who may be looking for marriage, maybe looking for long term. Because, in my opinion, guys, and this is only my opinion, the men in Colombia are much more attractive in Barranquilla, in Cali, and Medellin. So you're going to find people, for example, who are a little bit more tall. We don't want, the 5'2", 5'3". In Cali, in Barranquilla, you can find people a little bit taller. So the women who are interested in dating, maybe eventually getting married, I think those other places are better.
Okay. All right. That's fair. We had a few more questions that were not specific to Peru, but more based on like your experience, bopping around over the last 5 years. Just was curious about did you ever make it to Panama?
I did visit Panama. I did, and I liked it. I didn't love it. I felt that there wasn't a lot to do in Panama. The one thing that I did like about Panama was the accent. I had a very easy time understanding and communicating with the people of Panama. There were a lot more,
Mm-hmm.
so I didn't know who was American and who wasn't. I think Panama offers an environment where you can blend in a lot more than Lima. You're going to stand out as a black woman in Lima, I would say that. Um, but it wasn't for me. It wasn't for me.
Okay. Um, of the Spanish speaking countries you've lived in, where did you feel that you fit in the most, even when you weren't fully fluent in Spanish?
Cali, Colombia. Cali, Colombia, definitely. Because they have a huge Afro Latino population. They have a very welcoming spirit there in Cali. If you're not speaking, they don't know you're not from there. That's a huge advantage in terms of safety, security, and comfort. So Cali definitely um, would be my answer.
Okay. And so I love this question. If you were to start your Spanish learning journey all over again, would you change anything about it?
Mm, the the only thing I think I would change is I would have started sooner. I would have started, for example, when I was an undergrad in college. Because by now I would have such good fluency that I would be able to communicate in other countries. Like, I want to go to Cuba eventually. And that accent is, yeah,
It's tough.
right.
It's tough.
It's tough. And so I've tried to practice with a couple of people from Cuba so I can kind of prepare my mind for visiting that country. Whew. The only thing is, if, for example, the guy that I know who's extremely fluent, he's been doing this for 10 years, 10 years. So he speaks Spanish like a native. The only thing that I would change is I would have started sooner. Because I think even in the United States, if I ever had to permanently move back to the United States, I could still use that Spanish. You can speak fluent English, fluent Spanish. That's going to serve you wherever you go.
Yeah. Yeah. Did you ever consider going to Chile?
I did consider it. I didn't hear good things about, and their accent is extreme.
It is. It's I've heard that we're maybe a generation or two away from it being classified as its own language, not even still being considered Spanish.
Mhm. Because all of the people that I practice with from other countries, they say they cannot understand the people in Chile. So if native understand them, imagine the time that I'm going to have.
Okay. Well, you've named your YouTube channel Travel Spanish with Claire. So I think that's, very full circle for somebody who initially left the country with absolutely no Spanish and really no expectation that they would be learning it. What made you decide to create a YouTube channel? Because you've been abroad, you've been traveling for a while.
Oh man, that's an excellent question. Excellent question. I think when I got to Peru, I started to transform a bit because I have spent so much time outside of the academic space. I do feel that I have had sufficient time to heal from a lot of the trauma that I endured in America, on my job, in my community. And it was just, in my mind, it was time. It's kind of like re-emerging, like saying, okay, I've had this time to really take a break. I've had this time to work on the things that really needed my attention, psychologically, mentally, cognitively, physically as well. So I finally felt ready to represent myself because I've always been a person who had to speak and to teach
Mhm.
and help other people. And I thought, well, how can I do that without returning into the space that made me sick to begin with? Returning to the academic space where I knew I was going to be right back on that hamster wheel. And I was watching YouTube one day and someone said, hey, everyone should have a YouTube channel. And it was kind of through that video that I began to think, okay, well, do I know that I have something to offer? I know that I have all of this training. I know that I can combine what I learned in the academic space with what I've learned traveling. And I want to do that. I want an opportunity to do that now that I'm in a better space mentally, psychologically, such that I could talk also about what it has meant for my mental health to not have to be in America and how that has transformed my ability to communicate with people, to finally present in a way that says, I don't feel that oppression that I felt for so long. Being a college professor, being a psychologist, being in this very high pressure environment for so long, I finally felt healed enough to be in front of people again. And that's my long answer to that.
Okay. Well, there is a link in the description of this video so that you can go over and subscribe to Claire's channel. If you are interested in life in Peru, you absolutely should be following her because her videos are very like I wanna say practical, but I mean that in the best possible way. Like, you share your experiences, with the things I think people need to know if they are considering, a move like that. Um, we have time for one more question, and I think this kind of is a full circle question because initially you were talking about like you never envisioned yourself in a rural situation. You wanted to be in the city. You wanted to have those amenities. We have a question here about the infrastructure there in Lima. Have you had to go without any creature comforts? Talk about your apartment hunting experience a little bit?
Sure, I think that's an excellent question. So this was one of my surprises about Lima. The modernization that has occurred over the last 10 years in Lima is unmatched. You can get a similar apartment like I had, for example, in New York City. There is, for example, there are no, a big thing in the Dominican Republic is the power outages. Big thing in South Africa as well. Sometimes in South Africa, I would sit for 4 hours in the dark. That does not happen in Lima. Another thing that I was pleasantly surprised about is the water. So in Mexico, at least in the place where I was living, I always had to buy all this bottled water or buy the large tank. Here in Lima, they have worked diligently on being able to provide a clean water source. So all you need is a water filter and you can drink water from the tap, which is something you cannot do in the Dominican Republic or Mexico. So the infrastructure is very modern. It's been updated over and over again. And Lima is a little bit more privileged than other parts of Peru. It's the place where the president is. So there's been a lot more modernization than I expected. To me, it's wonderful.
Okay. All right. Well, there you have it, folks. If you want to know more about what it's like to live in Lima, Peru as a Black woman, please make sure you check out Claire's YouTube channel, Travel Spanish with Claire. Thank you so much, Claire, for joining us this evening and sharing your experiences because I know, like I said in the open, this isn't a place that we often hear a lot about. And so, as so many folks are looking to leave the United States, I think it's a good idea to explore as many options as possible.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. I hope that some people will at least consider Peru. And if you're interested, please don't forget to subscribe to my channel.
Okay.